Hello, everyone, and welcome to another exciting episode of Freemium Mode, the show where we give you all tips, tricks, insights, and advice on everything related to B2B marketing and PR within the video game industry. Kind of following on from last month, I thought to be fair to everyone in our company, I'd get the other founder of BGM on the show. John here is with us all the way from Brighton, which is not that far really, but I'll say that anyway. And he is here to speak to us about everything to do with developing a compelling and insightful B2B strategy. Thank you, John, for taking the time out to actually do
Thank you.
this.
Thank you for the excellent intro that makes me sound far more qualified for this than I feel sometimes. And it's also good to know that James got equal billing. So
Yeah.
let's see how we go with this one.
exactly. So yeah, this whole episode is on strategy and developing a strategy, and I think it's often something that can be quite daunting for a lot of people when they hear that word and they think about marketing strategy. They kind of maybe overinflate it as a thing, but it's obviously a very vital and important part of anything that you do in the marketing space. I suppose one thing that we often engage with within this is always talking about what marketing is and what the strategy is versus other elements of the work. So that's where we're going to start off today. I would say that as always, we have the wonderful Tamsin on our channels, just giving us a reminder. So if you do have any questions, any comments, any thoughts, please feel free to add them into the chat, and we'll get round to them as soon as possible. And if not, we'll make sure to respond to them after this session, because I think there's a lot that we're going to cover off. Anyway, the first thing that we're going to kick off with is kind of two words that I think are often associated when we talk about planning within B2B marketing, and that is strategy and tactics. And I think for those of the uninitiated, those who might not be just speaking marketing speak all the time, I thought this would be a good way to kick off, John, and get your thoughts on what those differences are and how they might be similar and how they might be different.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good starting point, because it's almost like the first thing we need to be doing in any process of building whatever we're calling this, right? A marketing plan, a go-to-market plan, whatever, is to actually define what the process and what the requirements are. So, I see the three words are interchangeable a lot: plan, tactics, strategy. Now, you could say the hierarchy is that you have a strategy and you have tactics, and together they become a plan. But the problem is, I think that lots of people, myself included, come into a communications role and we haven't been taught what these things are, how to do them. But kind of as a marketer, you're kind of thrown in, and you're meant to suddenly know what you're doing, and clients expect you to know what you're doing, obviously, because they're looking for you for a lot of guidance. So strategy is essentially your kind of aspirational roadmap for where you want to end up. Okay, so an idea of a strategy is you've already defined that you're going to make a certain type of video game or product, and the strategy are the stepping stones that you need to execute to get it into the market and drive customers and meet your business goals. The strategy from a marketing perspective should be grounded in the marketing. It shouldn't be, and we see this a lot, especially on the B2B side, the success of a marketing campaign is judged by revenue. Well, there's a lot of reasons why revenue isn't my problem. I can bring a customer in, but unless I'm now suddenly going to be in charge of the sales team, I can't close that deal. So I think the framing has got to be limited, and then the tactics are the ways and means in which you deliver on your strategy. Okay. And so marketing tactics are going to broadly fall under things like social media, content strategy, advertising, paid media, experiential events. It's kind of, a shopping list of things where you're going to be building awareness and brand value. But the strategy is the underlying roadmap of, you know, of where you want to be. Think game of life, right? That
Yeah.
it's your path.
Mhm.
What we from my experience find on when we're talking in as if, you know, in the voice of a PR agency, is clients should have the strategy set before they come and speak to us, but very often they don't. Very often it goes back to, we have some business goals, but we don't have a marketing strategy, and that's kind of what we're lent on quite heavily for. So that's in turn why we over the years have built a process of, you know, driven by workshops where we try and establish some semblance of a strategy that, and everyone signs up, and then we build the tactical plan.
Mhm. Definitely. I think that's a really interesting point, and I think it's often something you talked about kind of bringing a video game to a market, and I think that ties nicely to our next kind of point that we're covering off is the differences between a B2B one and a B2C one, especially within, I think, the games industry. When you are working in this sector, I think there are going to be differences. There'll be similarities as well. So I think it's very important to understand that type of separation,
Mm.
especially with video games, the split between B2B marketing strategy and a kind of B2B, B2C marketing
Yeah.
strategy. So what would you say on that?
Well, I think again, it's one of those ones where if you took, and we know internally, right? We know on our morning calls about this. You know, if you took, you know, the folks working more on the consumer side of our client base and said, right, come and do this B2B campaign, everyone will run screaming, because the assumption is it's wildly different.
Yeah.
If we're talking from a strategy perspective, it's not, because, you know, what is consumer? Right?
Mm.
What is consumer? You could be, a consumer product is a perfume, a consumer product is a car. It's a, you know, in our world, it's a video game. You're not going to do the same things for all, you know, they're not homogenous.
Hmm.
Um, so from a strategic perspective, it's there shouldn't be any difference, because when you're building a strategy, once again, the strategy is the roadmap, the blueprint. It is not the tactical execution. Now, the tactics are going to be different. The tactics are going to be governed by things like lead times, prices, where you go and buy this product or service. So when we talk about, you know, when we're working with a business focused client, they're very often selling a sort of a technology that may be in the cloud that you can't feel, you can't touch,
Yeah.
you can't buy. Um, so you have a sales, and it's going to be really expensive, or it's going to be a percentage of your revenue model, right? So
Mhm.
those things, you don't just go, oh well, I'll try it, and then tomorrow I don't like it, I'll take it back to the shop. You know, this could take months of integration. It could affect your whole business technology stack. It will, you know, it could be built into your revenue forecasts over multiple years. So that's a really long sales cycle, and you have to use then marketing tactics that are about engendering trust, about showing value, about, you know, well product, our product does these things different or new. You know, to use a buzzword, our product's built around amazing AI, and the old way of doing things aren't. You know, it's about lots and lots of touch points, so it lends itself very well to content-based marketing.
Yeah.
Really good on terms of LinkedIn. If you look on a consumer product cycle, you tend to be marketing when that product is almost ready or ready for sale. It's going to
Mm.
be a lower cost, it's going to be a tangible product, right? It's going to maybe come with like a pre-order. It's gonna be colorful, and your marketing is going to hinge far more on creative differentiation, because you are probably working within a mandatory price bracket.
Mhm.
What I mean by that is, you can't really go out and launch a PlayStation game, uh, and make it wildly different in price to the alternative choices, right? You've got to play within the same bucket. So your differentiation tactically is different. But the
Yeah.
strategy of finding all of those and answering the questions you need to answer to make those decisions are pretty much the same. You know, you can go back, and you can, when you get used to it, make it quite process driven.
Mhm. I really like the point you make here about, like the idea of people stepping into that a B2B piece of activity,
Mm.
following a strategy and seeing that as quite a scary thing. But maybe the tactics might be different and alien, from a B2B to a B2C and vice versa. But like the actual strategy should remain fairly consistent and similar
Yeah.
across those streams, which
But
I think
I
is
think I think as well, speaking from a BGM experience, when we're working with a games client, when we're working with a publisher, right?
Hmm.
It's a great example. The strategy is done, right? The
Hmm.
strategy is, here is a game, here are the USPs, right? This is why it's cool, or we may work on refining those, but they'll be there because it will be a genre, it will be a style, it will do certain things, right? It's going out on a certain platform. You'll be able to buy it on a certain date. So really, we're left with a set of tactical questions.
Yeah.
When somebody comes to us on the B2B side, very often the scenario is, and you know this very well,
Mm.
we need PR because we're about to launch something that we've never done before. Okay, that's great. Who are you selling it to? Anyone that will buy it. Right, you don't have a strategy then. And then that's when we go through the workshop process and we go through iterations, and then we look at what marketing channels they're already using. Then we can build some tactics that work. But it's that bit is where the difference is. And I think without recognizing that one scenario needs a strategy and one scenario doesn't, people think it's all down to tactical differences, and it's not really.
That's I mean, it does make me chuckle because it is so true, and I think there's a lot of onus put on just being able to come up with exactly what needs to be done. I always say sometimes that, like marketing PR, sometimes looking at like, you wouldn't expect, a plumber or a builder just to come into your house and you just go, just build me a kitchen without any sense of direction or goal in mind. It would just, it wouldn't work. And
Yeah,
I sometimes think it's the same type of thing. And I think again that leads nicely into our next question of like, if we are, which is very common, dealing with a client or having a conversation that doesn't have an established strategy in place, like how do we go about putting that in place? Because it's, like
yeah.
we said, ideally that's already been done, that's already been established when we start conversations. Often it's not. So what do we do when it's not? How do we take that one forward?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a really great point, and once again, this is where I think people find it very scary, and I think this is the point at which mistakes creep into the process. And by mistakes, really, I mean assumptions.
Yeah.
So when you're at a point where you want to put together your strategy, this is the point at which you need to put assumptions to one side. As the marketer Mark Ritson says, you've got to think like a customer. You've got to be customer centric, because if you don't, and if you sit there and you go, we know what our customers want, but you haven't asked them, then you're going to start making really poor decisions. So before you do the strategic bit, you need to go and gather lots of data, right? So, once again, like, and there are so many great examples, if you watch, if you go searching on YouTube, if you go to the marketing press, where this is where focus groups come in, this is where surveys come in, this is where big consumer brands spend millions on getting their consumers in a room, showing them products, asking detailed questionnaires. I mean, we've just been through an election, right? The amount of election polling and focus grouping that goes on to understand intentions, to define what people want to hear. How are they going to make their choices? What are their choices based on? And it can be very easy to think that that's only something that big brands do, but you can do it really effectively at any size. So an example of how we do it is, when we start working with any company, and I'll talk mostly from a B2B perspective, because as I say, from a consumer perspective, very often these tactical questions don't emerge. But if we were, for example, going to be doing the comms strategy, the marketing strategy for a studio or publisher over time, we would do all of this, right? But the first thing you do is, you go and research what's being said, what is the media coverage been, what's the what's the reaction from the press? Are they cynical? Are they engaged with it? Do they think it's good? What are the competitors doing?
Mm.
So when you're looking at the competitors, you're looking at, do they have something similar? Are they getting more engagement from their customers? Are they pricing it differently? Are the things that we're being told by our new client, are they unique selling points? Are they unique? Or is everyone just decided that we're going to jump on a bandwagon buzzword and do something? So what you really want to do is you want to kind of take away the assumptions, you want to take away the varnish, and really get to a point of going, here is some data that lets us make informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can start looking at your strategy, because you can then look at what is feasible, right? So, as Mark Ritson, who I'll probably reference a couple of times because I'm a big fan of his, and he explains things really well. He describes it as kind of like mapping out where in your available market you are most likely to have the most success. So he calls it market orientation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So an example of that is, if you take a video game, not every kind of gamer, not every demographic is going to love that video game.
Yeah.
You want to target at people who like that genre or that style or that character or whatever, right? So we do the same, and we go through a process of defining what the audience is, where they exist, how they want to hear from people, and what will drive their engagement furthermore. And then that's a process.
Mm.
We do things like SWOT analysis. And it's really important to get the voices of the company in the room, because very often you can find that nobody's really had that discussion internally.
Yeah.
Everybody decided that they need to work with a PR agency, but nobody sat around and gone what they want them to do or why or whatever. So I find a workshop, I find part of facilitating a workshop is bringing consensus to the table as well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm sure, from your experience, you often find, especially working with a startup, you'll find that the CEO will appear and everyone else will go silent, because they're just like, oh, he's a genius because he's the CEO, or he invented all of this. And it's like, okay, fantastic. But everybody has an equal voice, and we need to bring consensus to whatever becomes a strategic plan.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point about getting everyone around the table, because often I think there's that perception that PR and marketing is just a nice to have. It's an add-on to your things, amplification of your product. But often, because it's about communicating things to the public, your audiences, it's a case of understanding what the consensus is, and it does raise those questions. I know we've had this thing where we're speaking to someone and we ask these questions, or we pose these ideas, and either we'll have a conversation and they say one thing, and then once it's written down on paper and it's like a single sentence summary, they're like, actually, I hate that sounds awful. And then we've also had situations where people have actually gone, we need to go back and do some more internal conversations, because we don't actually know.
Yeah.
You've actually made us question those things. I think the strategy session often becomes a much bigger thing than you think it is going to be from a client's point of view. I think definitely.
I think so, and I think, look, they're a great opportunity, because really, a good workshop is basically all about the why. Why are you doing this? Why have you done this before? Why do you want to do this new thing? And if there are great answers, there are great answers. But oftentimes, again, a lot of things are based on assumption. And I think that it's an interesting one. Marketing and PR have an interesting position within business, right? And especially as an agency. And I remember it was said by a previous boss of mine, that said, PR agencies are unusual because we get access to the top table of a business, right? We're brought in because we're seen as very strategic and very important, because communications is deemed important. And so we can get access kind of to the skin a bit more
Yeah.
than other, than maybe an ad agency or something that's more on the creative end. So it's a really great opportunity to sort of get in there. Now, what you want really for that to be effective is people that are willing to listen and to change existing behaviors. But sometimes that's not in our remit, and that's a whole kind of dance, with the client about what you can and what you can't do. But very often when you start trying to look at things strategically, and you start bringing things like brand identity, and like design and positioning is a really important piece of strategy, right? And positioning, what we mean by positioning is, if you are, let's try and think of an example. You're going to launch a car, okay? What, first of all, market, what sector of the market are you going to take? Are you going to do an SUV? Are you going to do an electric car? You're going to do a super hand-built sports car? Okay. And then when you've decided your market segmentation, what's your positioning? What's the thing that you do that is different to your competitors, and how do you explain that and communicate it? And there's a really classic PR marketing text called Positioning, by Rees and Trout, Al Rees, and I can't remember the other guy's name. It's really old. It's from the 80s. It's on Amazon. It's still brilliant, because it takes you through why positioning, or we might call it differentiation, is really critical in terms of building your strategy. So, going back to your question, how do we build a strategy? We do our insight, we do our audit, we do our research, we base our thinking on data. Then we look at the positioning that has been informed by that, and then we can look at how those things go together with the outcome we want to get to, right? Once again, that's a marketing outcome. That's not necessarily a business outcome. Business strategy, marketing strategy can be different. And then we go to the tactics, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at, FMCG, fast moving consumer goods, if you look at, Procter and Gamble or a company like Apple, their strategy remains the same. Their tactics change product by product, year on year, but their strategy remains the same, because they've done so much work on it, to decide what their market position is. Nobody will ever question Apple's market position, because the entire business is based on its position of being different. Right. So, that positioning, that strategy is so strong, it means that the tactics kind of create themselves. But it does mean you are a little bit boxed in, because the strategy is so clearly defined. But that's marketing.
I suppose that's what we deal with as well, like in terms of our environment, especially when in the B2B game space. Like there is, especially we work with people who are like startups, especially, and they're wanting to get their product out there, and it's about sometimes realizing that it's better for you to be, say, focusing on the AA market, or to the publishing market and stuff like that, and engaging within a niche that allows us to actually deliver on that niche, and that matches your current strategy. Because if you get Series A, Series B funding, and then you get much bigger, then your audience will change, and then therefore the strategy will change, and therefore the tactics will change. So 100%. And we touched on this just in the previous question, but going down to the practicalities, especially within like dealing with B2B games companies, like what is the strategy session format? We're talking about like the process and stuff, but when you're having these sessions, and obviously I've had the pleasure of being in the session with you as well, we're doing this, but like for the sake of our audience and for posterity, like what's the actual running order of a strategy session in an ideal world, and how would you go about that?
Just for our audience, if there is anyone outside the company watching, I get given this bit because nobody else really wants to stand in a room and seem energetic for 8 hours and draw things on whiteboards. So that's become my USP within the company. So as I say, we will always go into, so we call it a workshop, right? Because if we call it a strategy session, it's going to terrify people, or people are going to go, well, why are you doing that? We don't need a strategy. We know our strategy. We call it a workshop because it's our major forum for asking all the dumb why questions that we need to, right? So it's really the point at which we sort of ask the questions, get some clarity, but we also reflect the work we've already done on that analysis and data. So we will always come into these sessions having done between 1 and 2 weeks research work, where, as I say, we'll have gone over their social media footprint, their brand, their tone of voice, their media coverage, anything we can get. We ask them to present sales materials, marketing documents, excuse me, anything that a customer would see from that company. That's our starting point, because that will tell us, that will give you a good flavor when you go into that session to, where they are in terms of, is the strategy tight and we're really happy with it, and this is all about, now we're going to move on to tactics and creative and coming up with a great idea that ties that things together, or actually do we need to do a bit more work? And a good example of things like that is we work with a company back before the summer, and we did a workshop, and that workshop established beyond anyone's expectations that they were absolutely not ready to do PR, because the brand execution wasn't right. There was loads of confusion in terms of the marketing messages and the positioning, and underlying it, the company's successful, cash flow positive, well established as a market leader. But those things had been the focus, and there was no marketing strategy in place, and so that company's gone away. It's done a rebrand. It started looking at that stuff, and hopefully they're coming back to us when they're ready for us to do what we do well. So we'll go into that session with a good amount of work under our belt, a good amount of data. And again, if there's some market data out there, analyst data on the market, the audience, the customers, that's fantastic. We'll do that session with them, and then the output, and then I'll typically run some little exercises. Maybe it really depends on the people in the room. Some people are super engaged and it's really positive. Some people look like they've been forced to be there, and you have to kind of be a bit peppy. And then what we'll do is we'll record it, we'll take notes, and then we will go and put all of that information together with a layer of initial filtering and thinking, then go back to them. Again, that might be another week to 2 weeks of work. And then typically for us, that's around a 20-page document, which basically goes, this is what you told us. This is how we understood your positioning, your what you want to achieve. Are we in agreement? And once we've got a consensus on that, and we might tweak it, we might have more conversations, we will then say, right, great, these are the tactics we suggest. And it's at that point we kind of define the shape of the program, what's going to happen every month, what our 3 months, 6 months, 12-month goals are going to be. So everybody is aligned on that. So that's the way we do it. I mean, I'm a big fan of these, my new toy. These are from a company called Pip Decks. And what they are effectively is they are a set of they're not flashcards, but what they do is that if you haven't done facilitating and moderating before, they've got lots of different exercises depending on what you're trying to get people to do or trying to achieve, that they call them recipes, right? And it's literally, do this thing, it will take you 30 minutes, and this is what you need. So, for example, here we go. Let's find a good one here. Right. So here's one called positive influence. Okay. So the idea is you work together as a team. It says here, work together to identify an important user, customer, or other stakeholder to invest in educating, right? So the idea behind this is a positive customer will go and inform other people about you, right? So that's social media, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
what we try and do with influencers, right? This is why, you know, we bore our friends and family to death when we see something we love or we buy a product we love, right? That's what this is about, right? So this gives me on the back, which is too small to see. It gives me 4 steps to running that exercise. It suggests some other exercises that might go together with it. And so if I'm going into a scenario with a client, I might have picked a few of these beforehand, and then if it's not going the way I want, or I have a specific goal, I can say, let's now do this exercise. And it can be really helpful. And if you, as I say, if you've not done it before and you're feeling a bit nervous about being the person that kind of holds the session together, and these sessions that we typically run between 2.5 to 5 hours.
Mm.
It's a long time to keep people engaged, especially if you've got, you know, CEOs and C-suite people whose time is valuable. So you want to give things a good amount of direction.
I think it's also really interesting because it gives you a sense of structure, and I think going to your point of who's going to be in those meetings, which is actually the next question. So I don't want to be burying the lead in that way, but like in terms of you're not necessarily dealing with everyone who's speaking the same language and has come from the same background
Hmm.
as you. You know, you might be dealing with real technical specialists who just think, well, our product's great because it answers this massive solution in the market, but they don't understand why it's not resonating with people. You might have a few marketing people there who understand exactly and see your point of view exactly, but I often find that those strategy sessions can sometimes be actually a point of highlighting where the marketing and PR support is valuable to people who are less informed
Yeah.
on the industry as much. And so these things add that huge value.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Max. You know, I've done sessions. I've been part of a session working with a client where it's been kind of like maybe a brand consultant or whatever, and they want our input as the comms team, you know. And another nice tool to use, especially if you can't bring everyone into a room physically, is I can't think of the name of them right now, but there are a couple of platforms out there where you're doing basically virtual post-it notes and virtual mind maps. And again, you can facilitate those really nicely because you can, you know, you can ask a question, you can ask everyone to write their own answers down, and then live on screen you can kind of discuss them, you can put them into little groupings, you can filter, and again, it's about, you know, asking questions that bring consensus of thought and direction together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are loads and loads of tools out there. I just think that very often people get a bit frightened by the idea of running a session, and then therefore it's too easy to just go and write a document in a
Mm.
silo. But if you're doing that, you're going to end up basing it on assumptions. I think there's a really great example of relatively early on,
Mhm.
a company we work with called Score Loop, and I'll name them because they don't exist anymore because they got bought by BlackBerry. But they were basically a very, very early cross-platform mobile multiplayer engine, right?
Yeah.
And it had loads of features and it was amazing. And they were trying to engage publishers. And we went in. James and I were asked by the founder to go in and help them build a PR strategy and stuff. And it was only sort of late on in the session, and we've been flown to Germany to do it. That we went round the developer relations team. Okay, so the people that deal with email queries and help tickets and stuff, and said, what are people mostly asking you about? And they're like, oh, the only thing they're interested in is high score tables. It's the only thing that they use our product for is putting a high score table in a game. You're like, has anyone flagged this internally that you're positioning your product as this do everything super capable thing? And the one thing everyone is doing with it is just high score tables because that's like a competitive element and they
Mm.
don't need more than that, you know. And you know, we established they hadn't. you know, and it actually led to them looking at the product roadmap and going, well, where we're putting all this development effort into things that we don't need. But what we didn't do was actually ask any of the internal team that meet customers what the requirement is. So that's why
Yeah.
these sessions are important to give people voice.
I think it's a really I think that's so, and it doesn't necessarily stop those ideas developing down the line. I think like Duolingo is a good example of that, where obviously it's very stuck to language learning, but now it's built out offerings for like I think it's maths and music learning now within it, which is a very weird thing to then see it. But I think that's what happens. It's established, it's been able to get that audience, and then it can broaden it out and diversify a bit, knowing that it's cornered the market in one area. Um,
Yeah.
we've touched on this as well, but I think it'd be good to kind of just quickly go through this on like who needs to be involved. Obviously, we're speaking about something that sometimes has the CEO in it, sometimes it doesn't. Like in your dream scenario, who is going to be involved in that strategy session?
I think it's important to have somebody that can represent. I mean, obviously, it's going to be driven by the marketing team. And very often, if it's a startup or an early stage company, there isn't a marketing team. It's the CEO who at that point has been doing everything. And the reason that you're in a room with him is because he knows he can't do everything. Maybe has brought funding in, or maybe that it's growing, and he needs to bring other people in. So first of all, and once again, we're really mainly talking about a B2B scenario here. So it's important to have somebody first that owns the marketing. Okay, that can speak with authority into what's happening, what's possible, what isn't, and the pros and processes. Sales is really important because realistically, marketing's job is to make the sales team successful, or at least to remove the excuses of failure from the sales team. Oh, well, I couldn't sell it because the marketing was shit, kind of,
Yeah.
right? So I personally find that having somebody from sales is really important, because you want to be part of understanding that customer is understanding the choices and the motivations and the constraints they've got. Who do they need to get sign off from? Who actually signs who actually makes the decisions on the contracts and stuff? Because you may be targeting a customer that is the entry point, but the decision maker is somewhere else. So then maybe you need to have two marketing tactics going on. Then really, it's anyone else that brings value. So if you're working with something quite technical, bring somebody in that's quite technical, because more often than not, the differentiation, the positioning will have an element of innovation, or we do this thing better and whatever. And it's our job to make sure that is absolutely concrete, 100% defendable. Because if you go out into market and you've created a position and a strategy which is based on something that's not true, you will come tumbling down. And there are lots of examples of brands and companies and stuff that launch, have initial success, and it turns out it was all built on bullshit, and it crumbles. It's not the fault of the marketing, it's the fault of the people who lied to the marketing team very often. And so if we were looking from the equivalent of a games thing, you'd probably want to have people that have been doing, that are the product managers. So the product manager within a studio or publisher is the person who lives and breathes that game, that brand, the story. So they're going to bring you all of the insight about, why you should fall in love with this plucky character and the narrative story that evolves after 17 hours or whatever. Or it might be somebody who's like, well, let me tell you how we've got more pixels on screen than anyone's ever done before. You want anyone in that room that is going to help you uncover the special sauce.
Yeah. I think this in the game space as well, because often in the B2B world, you're not in like more consumer world. Usually everyone in that company is really into their games, really into the games industry, knows it almost as well as anyone like at BGM, for example. So you're speaking the same language, but from experience, you end up with in the B2B world, you're speaking to people who aren't necessarily games experts. They might be very good CEOs or financial officers or technically skilled individuals, but they're not necessarily gamers or part of the games industry in a traditional sense. And so you're having to have that push-pull environment with them, where you want to explain to them the nuances of a very, very, very niche sector, while also bringing in their experience and the broader industry at large, which I think is a bit of a nuance within
Yeah.
developing a strategy for the B2B games
Yeah.
sector.
I mean, I think thinking back sort of over my career today, I think some of the hardest ones actually is when you're working with a big company. And on the one hand, it's great, right? Because they're established, they know what they're doing, they'll have a strategy, or whatever. And they'll have deep pockets where the company might not run out of cash flow or whatever.
Yeah.
But what I've found in those situations is you're no longer dealing with those people that are involved in the strategy of what you're doing, and
Mm.
and you have people who are that layer of just like, they're just in charge of the execution.
Mm.
So what I mean by that is, a PR manager or a product manager. And then when you start saying, well, actually, I've got some deeper questions here, or this is uncovering some thinking where there's a really big opportunity if we combine it with something else you do, or we look deeper back into the business, and the wall comes down and goes, no, that's not what you're here for. And that's frustrating, because basically, it's a big missed opportunity. I mean, marketers will know that you'll get a better result if you're able to sort of bring in, I hate buzzword alert, but synergies, right? If
Mm.
things can be aligned, they'll work better. And so sometimes in a big business, they're when you say, well, why are we doing this? They're like, well, because we had another agency before you, and so we just need another agency.
Yeah.
Not like, well, because we're driving this strategy, or we need this tactical outcome. It's just like, well, we have a PR
Yeah.
strategy. That's what we do.
We're a
We have
company
a
of a certain size. Of course, we have a PR agency. That's just what you do
yeah,
when you get big,
yeah,
It's
yeah. Exactly. It's like, it's a corporate responsibility, shareholder tick box.
yeah.
And I'm personally, I don't really like that, because you can't really affect deeper change. That's why I enjoy working with the companies we do.
Yeah. No, it is true. Like getting really involved and seeing how they change and grow. And nice segue into our next one is about reviewing.
Or you could couch it as asking annoying questions.
I'll say I'm gonna be the mature one here and go, yeah, no, it's about
Yeah.
seeing how the company grows and all that. Just so I can actually bring us on to our next question, which is very much about, like, if we are working with companies, and especially within the very, very changing market of the games industry, how are we reviewing that strategy? How often do we review that strategy to make sure it's still working? I always try to compare it to, like, the crisis comms scenario of, like, you can do all this work on planning and preparation, and then you just put it into a folder and leave it and don't look at it even when the crisis does happen. You've got all this resource and planning that just is completely ignored. And I sometimes feel that strategy can fall down that same like problem, in terms of you do all this work and then it just sits there and is never looked at again or reviewed or
Hmm.
considered as the company grows and changes direction.
Okay, yeah. I think you've couched that question very well, because I was going to say, really, anyone that feels the need to sort of keep tugging at the strat, oh, is the strategy right? Or let me go and tweak it. Well, then the strategy isn't right, then, right? Because
Mm.
the strategy the strategy should give you clarity of thinking between point A and point B, C, D, whatever, right? And so if you've done the work and you're comfortable with the strategy, the only thing that will really require you to go back to that is if market conditions dictate that the strategy is not going to work. Not it's not working, but it's not going to work. So
Mm.
you could have defined a strategy based on something, and then there's a big economic change in the market, or the platform. I mean, this does happen, right? The platform that you're targeting gets bought by somebody,
Mm.
right? So that's a great example. I mentioned it before, Score Loop, and then they got
Mm.
bought by BlackBerry, and then BlackBerry died. you couldn't have foreseen that if you were schooling, and we've had the same, right? It makes me think of the Nokia, the burning platforms
Yeah.
memo that killed that company and things like that. So there will be things outside of the strategy that you go, oh, hang on a minute, we need to go back and look at that, right? Sorry, just another example might be you might be have been planning to build a live service game because 6 months ago everyone was telling you that's where the funding is, that's where the platform holders want you to be, and then you go, well, actually everybody's decided the live service isn't good, and Concord, was it Concord?
Yeah, it was
What's the
Concord
one
was
that's
the
just,
one.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
Concord, yeah.
things like that. Okay, we're not going to do live service. Warner Brothers have killed that market. Sony have pulled back. We're going to pivot. That's when you probably want to go back to your strategy, but your tactics you should be checking against, right? So we like to put in a milestone check at 6 months. There should definitely be an annual check, and really it can be based on feeling, because tactics can be a set of educated assumptions, and they can also be based on what you've been told by, in our case, the client. So we've got a live example at the moment where we put together our tactical plan was based on things that the client told us definitely would happen, that they would bring to us. That's not happening. So after 3 months instead of 6, we've gone back and said, we don't think that this is going to pan out. Can we introduce a replacement? Can we do something tactical? The strategy is the same. Okay, the goal we're aiming for is exactly the same. The measurement of success is the same, but we spotted immediately that tactic is just not going to pan out the way it was assumed at the workshop phase, and so we're going to change that. So I think you have to be flexible on your tactical thinking, and you have to be confident in your strategic thinking.
I like that. That's going to be a soundbite, Tamsin, if she's monitoring.
It's my new t-shirt. I've just
That's going to be at the next kind of event that we go to, our BGM branded t-shirt with that on the back. I love it. I think but it's really true when you talk about the games market shifting, because like you said, live service models, I think we're also seeing that with kind of the Souls-like games, and these aren't games that have just been pulled out within the last 2 months. They've probably been worked on for a considerable amount of time. And then just at the time that these are all coming to market, people are now saying, well, we don't need that, or this particular game has kind of made us have a negative impression on the genre and stuff. And I think that's always a really challenging thing for people who've put their heart and soul into something and have been beavering away, and then unfortunately the landscape changes. But that's when you need to review where the direction you're going and stick with your strategy, or pivot your strategy.
I think a great example is what you and I discussed this morning, right? Ubisoft have delayed their new game. They pulled an appearance in Tokyo Game Show this week. The strategy is the same, right? Because this game will have been in development for 3 years.
I think it's the longest one. I think so. Longer, 4 years, 4 or 5 years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the strategy started 4 years ago, and the strategy will be delivered. A game will come to market. The game has been built. It's been, they'll have focus group this. They've got an enormous global fan base that they'll have looked at all the feedback from the early builds, the beta test, the previews sent to press. All of that has been looked at, and the strategic thinking baked in, right? The delay is a tactic, right? Their tactical shift is being because, for whatever reason, right? The failure of Concord in the last 2 weeks maybe they feel we don't want to be putting out a multiplayer game in an environment where there's a lot of negativity around. Star Wars Outlaws been pretty well reviewed, but it maybe hasn't been the stellar reviews that you expect from a Star Wars branded game.
Yeah.
So tactically, the game may be done. They may be introducing some other elements. They may be going with this. We're going to make absolutely sure that there aren't any bugs or problems with this one on day one.
Hmm.
But that's not, let's not confuse strategy with tactics. It's a tactical shift. It's not a strategy shift. So they're the things where those things are examples of having to shift.
I really like that one. I mean, I also think, as we've said, I think the interesting thing with that is definitely the shift of, we're not doing a expansion pass. We're not doing
Yeah,
season pass anymore. We're now, you get the first expansion free, which is pretty much the same thing, but the language and the perception of it is just going to be completely different. And I'll be really interested to see if that affects their pre-sales for the game.
absolutely. And it's a great way of making gamers feel that if they do take a chance on something, that maybe that they've read the press and they're a bit less sure about something, that they're getting the perceived value on day one. If you sign up,
Yeah,
for the pre-order, we're going to make sure you get the game plus the DLC, not let you buy the game, and if you like it, you might stay around for the DLC. I
yeah,
mean, once again, great example of this done badly has been the Suicide Squad game by Warner Brothers,
mm,
right? You know,
yeah,
they saved the DLC with the Batman,
mm,
but but at that point the player base had dropped too far, right? So
yeah,
you kind of kept your crown jewel, rather than, if they'd have taken the Ubisoft approach, go, well, get the game, and if you pre-order or you buy within a week, we'll send you a code on social media and we'll give you the Batman thing,
yeah.
right?
No,
And
no, I
then
think
and then
it's
a
I
game
think
is going to stick around and go, oh my god, I really want to play the Batman. That's that's the marketing. I think that's really smart marketing by Ubisoft.
yeah. I'll be really interested to
Don't
see
quote me
where
if
it
it's a
goes.
terrible failure, by the way, in January or February.
We'll make sure to edit that out.
Yes.
We're low on time, so I've only got one more because I think this is a really important one to end on, which is, a company has changed its directing, how much it affects its marketing strategy. I think it's a really good point to end on, because it echoes everything we've been saying here about, is it a strategic change or a tactical change? And if the company is changing its direction, how does that affect the actual marketing strategy, especially within the games industry? Would you still see that as this? How would you
Yeah.
engage in that conversation?
I'd look at it in the way of, I'd want to be open to revisiting that strategy, right?
Mm,
But it might be that you need to start again, or you need to go and ask some more questions or find out some more things, because is the reason to look again at the strategy because it wasn't right, or if
mm,
things, as we said before, if things changed around you that you just couldn't have foreseen. Okay,
yeah,
so once again, it's important that the decisions are made on data. So if you're going to change what you're already doing, is it supported by data? Is there reasoning behind it? Sometimes it's a factor of the strategy is broadly the same, because the strategy is just a roadmap. It's not full of detail, and it's a tactical shift. And something that I've seen many times over the years is, when a company is bringing a new service to market, so it's a SaaS
mhm,
platform or a technology or whatever, and they go, oh, well, the way we're going to make our money is we're going to be really kind of democratic and anyone can use it and you can get a free account and we're going to upsell.
yeah,
And then they find that they've got 1,000 developers that pay them no money, that have all got help requests and integration requests. And then they go, we're cutting the free tier because we've realized that the only actual way we make money is with an enterprise client or a publisher of
mm,
over a certain thing. Now, that's probably not a strategic change, but it means your tactics are different, because you're taking you want to look at your positioning, your messaging, your perceived value, the problems you solve, and that's going to carry through all of your comm strategy. But you're
mhm,
probably not going to have to come up with a whole new thing. It's just going to be lots and lots and lots of tweaks. So yeah, I think the important thing is if take anything away from this conversation, there are building blocks which relate to any situation, any scenario. And if you follow the process of the building blocks, you do your analysis, your data, your insight, your research, you use that to then inform your positioning, your strategy, and then you do your tactics. You should be able to go to one part of that without having to throw everything away.
That's a lovely way to end it on. Thank you so much. Thank you. I really enjoyed this one.
Pleasure.
And yeah, I think it's been incredibly good. And we're just coming to the end of our time. So perfect timing to kind of wrap up there. Yeah, thank you, John. It's been really interesting. And we'll make sure, as always, with all the kind of citations and various examples and resources that we've mentioned on this, these will be included when we upload this onto our YouTube channel, and we'll make sure they're cited on the upload for this. All's left to say is, yeah, thank you so much for everyone who might be listening or who might be listening afterwards, as this will be a recorded version as well. If this is just whetting your appetite, then we have many things to get interested in. We have all the previous episodes of Freemium Mode, which will be on our YouTube channel. We have our newsletter, the daily download, which you can get daily via your email inbox. Or if you want to keep your inbox a bit clean, you can subscribe to our weekly version via our LinkedIn. We are on LinkedIn, obviously, where we're posting all this fun updates on various bits of activity that we're doing. And let's not forget the Games Industry PR podcast, hosted by Jack and Tom. So they will also be sharing a lot of stuff also for the kind of consumer side as well, which is always interesting.
It's a smorgasbord of content.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely full to the brim. Fill your boots, and that's not even mentioning the reports and research that we periodically release, and also the previous ones that you might not have seen yet. So, really, there's no excuse. If you've got any questions, anything that you want us to support on, do let us know. Contact us directly or DM us via the website as well. But until then, thank you so much for joining, John. Thank you so much for being on the show. And until next time, this has been Freemium Mode.